The sound of my own son slapping me across the face echoed louder than any alarm I ever heard in 30 years at the fire department. I did not scream. I did not fight back. I just stood there tasting the copper tang of blood on my lip while my daughter-in-law smirked in the corner. They thought they had finally broken the old man. They thought fear would make me sign the deed to my house. But they forgot one thing. You do not start a fire in the home of a man who spent his life walking through flames. The next morning, I did not call the police. I did not cry. Instead, I went to the kitchen and cooked the biggest breakfast of Darnell's life. When he walked in, he smiled, thinking he had won. He had no idea that the man sitting next to me at the table was about to turn his entire world into ash. Before I tell you how I served my son justice along with his scrambled eggs, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that respect is something you earn, not something you demand. My name is Clarence Bishop, but everyone on the South Side just calls me Clay. I am 73 years old and my hands are rough from decades of hauling hoses and swinging axes for the Chicago Fire Department. I built my life on discipline, hard work, and the belief that a man protects his family at all costs. But that Sunday evening, standing in the kitchen I had tiled with my own hands back in 1982, I realized I was trying to protect a family that no longer existed. The air in the room was thick, suffocating. My son Darnell was pacing back and forth across the linoleum floor. He was 42 years old, but in that moment he looked like a petulant child. He was sweating, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding mine. Sitting at the small oak table was his wife Tiffany. She was tapping her manicured fingernails against the wood, a rhythmic, irritating sound that felt like a countdown. Tiffany was a woman who smiled with her mouth, but never with her eyes. She had moved into my house with Darnell 6 months ago after they lost their condo, and since then the warmth had been sucked out of these walls. "Dad, you are not listening to me," Darnell said, his voice rising an octave. "This is not gambling. It is an investment. Virtual real estate is the future. Everyone is doing it. I just need you to sign the equity line against the house. Just $100,000. I will double it in a month, and I will pay off your mortgage completely." I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms over my chest. "My mortgage has been paid off for 15 years, Darnell," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I paid for this house with overtime shifts and missed holidays. I am not risking the roof over my head for some magic internet money that does not exist." Darnell stopped pacing. He ran a hand over his face, frustration radiating off him in waves. "It is not magic money, Dad. You just do not understand modern finance. You are stuck in the past. You think money only counts if you break your back for it. Money only counts if it is real," I replied. Tiffany stopped tapping her nails. She stood up slowly, smoothing down her expensive silk blouse. I knew that blouse cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She looked at Darnell, then turned her cold gaze toward me. "You see, honey," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I told you he would not help. He does not care that you are struggling. He does not care that your business is failing. He is sitting on a gold mine with this property, but he would rather see his own son drown in debt than lift a finger." That was not true, and she knew it. I had bailed Darnell out of 3 failed startups in the last decade. I had paid for his car. I had let them move in here rent-free when they went broke. But Tiffany knew exactly where to stick the knife. She knew Darnell's weakness was his ego. Darnell's face turned a shade of red I had rarely seen. He looked at her, then back at me, his eyes filling with a mixture of shame and rage. "Tiffany is right," he spat out. "You have always been selfish. You care more about this dusty old house than you do about me. Mom would have signed it. Mom believed in me. Do not bring your mother into this," I warned, my voice dropping to a growl. "Viola would have told you to get a job and stop looking for shortcuts. That was the trigger." Tiffany let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Oh, please. Viola spoiled you, Darnell. That is why you expect kindness. But your father, he is just a bitter old man holding on to power because it is the only thing he has left. Look at him. He thinks he is some kind of king in his castle, but really, he is just a burden." Darnell stepped closer to me. The smell of alcohol on his breath hit me then. I had not noticed it before, but now it was unmistakable. He had been drinking to work up the courage to ask me for the money. "Sign the papers, Dad," Darnell said, his voice trembling. "Just sign the damn papers." "No," I said, "and that is final." The silence that followed lasted only a second, but it felt like an hour. Tiffany whispered, barely audible, "See, he hates you." Darnell snapped. His arm moved before I could register what was happening. His open palm connected with my cheek with a cracking sound that seemed to shake the foundations of the house. My head snapped to the side. My glasses flew off and skittered across the floor. The sting was immediate, hot and sharp, but the shock was colder than ice. I slowly turned my head back to face him. I could taste blood where my tooth had cut the inside of my lip. Darnell stood there breathing heavily, his hand still raised slightly, as if he could not believe what he had just done. His eyes were wide with panic. Tiffany, however, did not look shocked. She looked satisfied. For a moment, the old instinct kicked in, the instinct of a man who had brawled in burning buildings and held his ground against looters during the riots. I could have dropped him. I could have broken his jaw before he took his next breath. My fists clenched at my sides, the knuckles turning white. But I did not raise a hand. To fight him would be to lower myself to his level. To fight him would be to admit that he was a man worth fighting. And looking at him now, trembling and weak, hiding behind his wife's venom, I saw that he was not a man at all. I reached up and wiped the trickle of blood from the corner of my mouth with my thumb. I looked at the blood for a moment, then wiped it on my trousers. I stared straight into Darnell's eyes. I gave him the look I used to give rookies who panicked in a smoke-filled hallway. A look of absolute crushing disappointment. Darnell took a step back, his bravado crumbling. "Dad, I did not mean to—" "Shut up," Tiffany hissed. "Don not apologize. He provoked you. He needed to be shaken up. Maybe now he will listen to reason." I did not say a word. I did not scream. I simply bent down, picked up my glasses, and inspected the cracked lens. I put them back on my face. Then I turned my back on them. I walked out of the kitchen feeling their eyes on my back. I could hear Darnell sputtering, trying to justify himself, and Tiffany whispering toxic reassurances in his ear. I walked down the hallway past the photos of Darnell's graduation, past the picture of Viola and me on our 40th anniversary. Every step felt heavy, like I was walking through deep mud. I entered my bedroom on the first floor and closed the door. I turned the lock. It was a flimsy lock, one that could easily be kicked in, but it was a boundary. From the hallway, Darnell yelled, his voice muffled by the wood. "You better think about it tonight, Dad. Those papers need to be signed by tomorrow morning. Do not make me come in there." I stood in the center of my room, the sanctuary I had shared with my wife for 40 years. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a cold, simmering fury. I was a firefighter. I knew how to control the burn. I knew that if you let a fire rage uncontrolled, it consumes everything. But if you control it, if you direct it, it becomes a tool. Darnell wanted a signature. He wanted control. He wanted to be the man of the house. I sat down on the edge of my bed and took a deep breath, letting the rage settle into a cold, hard resolve. I reached under the bed and pulled out an old, dusty shoebox. Inside were my old service medals, a few letters from Viola, and something else I had prepared weeks ago ever since I noticed bank statements missing from the mail. I pulled out a cheap, prepaid flip phone, a burner phone. I had bought it with cash at a convenience store 3 towns over. Darnell and Tiffany monitored the landline. They checked my cell phone when I was sleeping, thinking I did not know. They thought I was a senile old man who barely knew how to use a remote control. They forgot that in my day we did not have Google. We had to be smart. We had to pay attention. I flipped the phone open. The screen glowed with a pale blue light in the dark room. My hands, usually steady, were trembling slightly, not from age, but from the adrenaline of crossing a line I could never uncross. I dialed a number I had memorized. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered on the other end. "Yeah, it is Clay," I said, my voice sounding like gravel. "Clay, it is late. Everything okay?" "No," I said, staring at the closed bedroom door. "The fire is out of containment. We are going to code red." There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice shifted, becoming sharp and professional. "Understood. What do you need?" "I need you here tomorrow morning at 7 sharp, I said. "Wear a suit and bring the file. The blue one. You sure about this, Clay?" "Once we pull this trigger, there is no going back." I touched the swelling on my cheek. I thought about the disrespect. I thought about Viola's memory being dishonored by the greed living under this roof. "I am sure," I said. "I am cooking breakfast tomorrow. Do not be late." I closed the phone and hid it back in the box. I lay down on the bed, staring up at the ceiling fan spinning slowly in the darkness. My cheek throbbed in time with my heartbeat. Darnell thought the slap was the end of the argument. He thought he had asserted dominance. He was wrong. The slap was not the end. It was the starting gun. Tomorrow he would get his breakfast. He would get his bacon and his eggs, and he would get exactly what he asked for. He wanted to be treated like a man. Fine, I would treat him like a man. I would let him face the consequences that grown men face. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I lay there in the dark, planning every move, every word, every silence. The fire was coming, and this time I wasn't going to put it out. I was going to let it burn. The sun had not even crested the horizon when I started peeling the potatoes. There is a specific rhythm to cooking a southern breakfast, a cadence that I learned from my mother and kept alive through 50 years of marriage to Viola. The sound of thick-cut bacon sizzling in my cast-iron skillet was the only music I needed. The smell of rendering fat brewing coffee and buttery grits drifted through the ventilation ducts, reaching every corner of the house. It was not just breakfast, it was bait. I set the table with Viola's good china, the plates with the gold rim that we only used for Christmas and Easter. I polished the silverware until I could see the reflection of a man who was done being a victim. When I heard footsteps on the stairs, I did not look up. I kept whisking the eggs, my movements steady and deliberate. Darnell walked in first, scratching his stomach, looking disheveled but arrogant. The fear from last night was gone, replaced by the smug confidence of a man who thinks he has broken a wild horse. Tiffany followed him wearing a silk robe that cost more than my first car. She stopped in the doorway, sniffing the air, her eyes widening at the spread on the table. "Well, look at this," Darnell said, a smirk spreading across his face. He pulled out a chair and sat down, kicking his feet out. "I knew you would come around, Dad. I told Tiffany you just needed a night to sleep on it. Nothing clears the head like realizing who holds the power." "Right?" Tiffany laughed, a sharp tinkling sound. "It looks delicious, Clay. See? It is so much nicer when everyone knows their place. I will go get the papers so you can sign them while the food is hot." I placed a platter of scrambled eggs in the center of the table. "Sit down, Tiffany," I said, my voice calm, almost warm. "The papers can wait. We have a guest coming." Darnell paused, a piece of bacon halfway to his mouth. "A guest who?" "The nurse from the nursing home." Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. It was a crisp, authoritative sound that made Darnell jump. He looked at me, confusion clouding his eyes. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the front door. I opened it to reveal a tall man in a charcoal gray suit holding a leather briefcase. "Mr. Sterling," I said, extending my hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." James Sterling smiled, shaking my hand firmly. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Bishop. When you called and said Darnell wanted to discuss the final details of the investment over your famous home cooking, I could not say no. I have a weakness for authentic grits." I led him into the kitchen. The color drained from Darnell's face so fast I thought he might faint. James Sterling was not just an investor, he was the whale. He was the man Darnell had been chasing for 6 months, the key to his entire fantasy of becoming a tech mogul. Darnell scrambled to stand up, knocking his fork onto the floor. "Mr. Sterling." Darnell stammered, wiping grease from his lip with the back of his hand. I did not know you were... what a surprise." I pulled out a chair for Sterling. "Please sit," I said. "Darnell was just telling me how much he respects your business acumen. I told him that if he is going to be partners with a man of your stature, we should at least break bread together." Tiffany, realizing the gravity of the situation, immediately switched into her charm mode. She tightened her robe and flashed a bright fake smile. "Oh, Mr. Sterling, Darnell talks about you constantly. Please let me get you some coffee." We began to eat. The food was perfect, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. Darnell was sweating, terrified that I would mention the slap or the argument or the coercion. But I did not. I played the part of the proud, slightly chatty father. I piled more bacon onto Sterling's plate and started talking. "You know, Mr. Sterling," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee, "Darnell has always been a dreamer, even as a boy. I remember when he was 12, he started a lawn mowing business. He had great flyers, great marketing." Darnell laughed nervously. "Dad, Mr. Sterling does not want to hear about..." "Nonsense," Sterling said, leaning forward. "I love hearing about the roots of an entrepreneur. Go on, Mr. Bishop." "Well," I continued, taking a slow sip of coffee. "He had all the customers, but he did not like pushing the mower, said it was inefficient. So he hired the neighborhood kids to do it for him, promising to pay them at the end of the month. He spent all the advance money on video games before the first lawn was cut." Sterling stopped chewing. He looked at Darnell. "Is that so?" Darnell turned red. "I was 12, sir. It was a lesson in outsourcing." I chuckled softly. "Oh, he learned. Just like he learned with that house-flipping project 3 years ago." You remember that son, the one in Bronzeville? Darnell's eyes widened in panic. Dad, please. He bought this beautiful old brownstone, I told Sterling, who was now listening very intently. He wanted to flip it fast. The foundation was cracked, sinking into the mud. The inspector said it needed $50,000 in concrete work, but Darnell said why bury money where no one can see it? So he put up new drywall, painted everything white, and sold it. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. 6 months later, the living room floor collapsed while the new owners were having dinner. Cost me my entire pension savings to settle the lawsuit so he did not go to jail for fraud. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the refrigerator humming. Sterling slowly placed his fork down on the plate. He wiped his mouth with a napkin and looked at Darnell with eyes that were cold and hard. Is that true? Darnell Sterling asked. The lawsuit you didn't disclose during our due diligence, Darnell stammered, his hands shaking. It was a misunderstanding. The contractors, my father is exaggerating. He is old, he gets confused. I looked straight at Sterling. I may be old, Mr. Sterling, and according to my son I am losing my mind. But I know the difference between a bad foundation and a bad man. I invited you here because I respect a man who builds things that last. My son, he likes to paint over cracks. Sterling stood up. He did not look at Darnell. He looked at me and nodded respectfully. Thank you for the breakfast, Mr. Bishop. The grits were excellent. And thank you for the information. Integrity is the only currency I trade in. Wait, James, Darnell shouted, jumping up. You cannot listen to him. He is vindictive. He is trying to sabotage me because I asked him for a loan. Sterling paused at the door. He asked you for a loan. You told me you were fully liquid and self-funded. Darnell froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Sterling shook his head in disgust and walked out the front door. When the latch clicked shut, it sounded like a gunshot. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Darnell turned to me. His face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred. The vein in his forehead was throbbing. You senile old fool, he whispered, his voice trembling with rage. Do you have any idea what you just did? That was a $5 million deal. I took a bite of my eggs. They were perfectly fluffy. I warned you, Darnell, I said calmly. I told you I do not support fake money. Darnell grabbed the edge of the table and flipped it. Plates, food, and coffee went flying, crashing against the wall in a chaotic mess of porcelain and grease. Tiffany screamed. You are done, Darnell screamed, stepping over the broken china to get in my face. You think this is a game? You think you taught me a lesson? You just signed your own death warrant. You want to play hardball? Fine. You will not see the light of day, old man. By the time I am done with you, you will be rotting in a state facility so deep they won't even find your dental records. He stormed out of the kitchen, Tiffany trailing behind him, casting one last look of venom at me. I sat there in the chair amidst the wreckage of my wife's good china and the ruined breakfast. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I picked up a piece of bacon that had landed on my knee and ate it. It was still crisp. They thought the war had just started. They did not know I had been digging the trenches all night. Let them scream. Let them threaten. A fire needs oxygen to burn, and I was about to suck the air out of their entire world. The war did not begin with shouting. It began with silence. After Darnell flipped the table, he did not kick me out. He did something far worse. He and Tiffany decided that I was no longer a person. I was a liability. 20 minutes after Mr. Sterling left, Darnell came back into the kitchen with a pair of wire cutters. He walked over to the wall and snipped the phone line. Then he took my cell phone off the counter. It is for your own good, Dad, he said, not meeting my eyes. You are clearly having an episode. Violent outbursts, delusions about my business partners. We cannot have you calling people and embarrassing the family. Until Dr. Jenkins can adjust your medication, you are staying inside. They changed the Wi-Fi password. They took the keys to my truck. They even put a child lock on the front door. I was 73 years old, a man who had pulled survivors out of collapsing buildings, and now I was a prisoner in the home I built. But they did not understand what this house meant. To Darnell, this place was just an asset. It was square footage. It was equity. He did not know about 1974. He did not know about the red lines drawn on the city maps that said people who looked like us were not allowed in this neighborhood. He did not see Viola crying in the car because 5 banks denied our loan application despite my perfect credit. We had to work double shifts and save every penny in a coffee can for 3 years just to put down a deposit that was double what the White families paid. Every brick in this house was paid for with sweat and humiliation. I endured the stares of the neighbors who did not want us here. I kept my lawn greener than theirs. I painted my fence whiter than theirs. I forced them to respect us. And now my own son, the boy who grew up sheltered by those very walls, was trying to sell that history for a quick cryptocurrency payout. The isolation was suffocating, but the erasure was worse. 2 days later, the strangers started arriving. I was sitting in the living room reading a book when a young couple walked in, led by Tiffany. They looked around, pointing at my vintage record player, the one Viola bought me for our 10th anniversary. "How much for the console?" the man asked. Tiffany smiled that same fake bright smile. $100. And I will throw in the vinyl collection for free. We are just clearing out some old junk to make space for the renovation. My hands shook as I turned the page of my book. I did not speak. If I spoke, they would use it as proof of my aggression. I watched them carry out my history. I watched them take my leather armchair. I watched them take the tool chest from the garage. But the breaking point came on Thursday. I heard a crashing sound coming from the attic. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and saw Tiffany coming down dragging 2 black garbage bags. The plastic tore on the railing and something spilled out. It was a blue velvet hat, Viola's Sunday hat, the one she wore to church every Easter. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice low. Tiffany kicked the hat back toward the bag. "Cleaning clay. This attic is a fire hazard. It is full of moth-eaten rags. The garbage truck is coming in an hour." "That is not trash," I said, stepping forward. "Those are my wife's belongings." "They are dust collectors," she snapped. "And since you are living here on our charity now, I decide what stays and what goes. Go back to your room before I tell Darnell you are being difficult again." I stood there for a long moment. I looked at the blue velvet hat lying on the floorboards. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear this house down around us. But I remembered the plan. I remembered that anger without leverage is just noise. I bent down, picked up the hat, and dusted it off. I did not look at Tiffany. I walked past her, carried the hat into my room, and placed it on the top shelf of my closet. Then I sat down at my desk. I could not use the phone. I could not use the internet. But Darnell and Tiffany had forgotten one thing. They had a daughter. Jasmine was 17. She was quiet, observant, and she had her grandmother's eyes. She spent most of her time in her room to avoid her parents' constant fighting, but she saw everything. She knew who the villain was in this story. That evening when Jasmine came home from school, she left her heavy backpack on the kitchen counter while she grabbed a glass of water. Tiffany was in the other room loudly negotiating the sale of my dining table on the phone. I walked past the counter. In one smooth motion, practiced from years of sleight-of-hand card tricks I used to do for the guys at the station, I slipped a folded piece of yellow notebook paper inside her algebra textbook. I did not stop. I did not look at her. I went straight to the sink and washed a glass. Later that night, around 2 in the morning, I saw a shadow pause outside my bedroom door. A piece of paper slid underneath. I waited until the footsteps faded away before I picked it up. It was a page torn from a notebook. In Jasmine's neat handwriting, it read, "Grandpa Mom is meeting a real estate agent named Steinberg tomorrow at noon while Dad is at the office. She told Dad she was going to yoga." I found a second phone hidden in her vanity drawer. "She is texting a man named Brad. What do you want me to do?" I smiled in the darkness. They thought they had cut off my lines of communication. They thought they had isolated the enemy. But they did not realize that while they were busy selling the furniture, I was busy recruiting the army. The war was cold, but the heat was rising, and I was about to light the match. The enemy did not come with a battering ram or a warrant. He came wearing a tailored Italian suit and smelling of stale tobacco masked by expensive cologne. His name was Dr. Thorne, though I doubted he had ever stepped foot inside a real hospital. Tiffany introduced him as a specialist in geriatric cognitive decline, a friend from her country club. To me, he looked like every corrupt building inspector I had ever bribed or threatened back in the 80s, the kind of man who would sign off on a fire hazard for an envelope of cash. They cornered me in the living room on a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the darkness gathering around me. Tiffany sat on the edge of the sofa, wringing her hands in a performance of concern that would have won her an Academy Award. Darnell stood by the door, arms crossed, refusing to look me in the eye. Tiffany said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We are just so worried about you." The outburst with Mr. Sterling, the confusion about the house keys, the aggression. "Dr. Thorne is just here to help." The doctor sat opposite me, opening a leather folder. He did not check my blood pressure. He did not listen to my heart. He did not ask me about my diet or my exercise routine. He simply looked at me with dead shark-like eyes and asked if I knew what year it was. I stared at him. "It is 2024, I said clearly, "and I know exactly who I am. I am Clarence Bishop. I own this house, and I know a con artist when I see one." Dr. Thorne sighed and looked at Darnell, shaking his head theatrically. "You see, hostility and paranoia. Classic symptoms of advanced dementia. The frontal lobe is deteriorating. He believes he is being persecuted. If we do not intervene now, he could be a danger to himself or others." Darnell flinched. Is it reversible?" "No," the doctor said, pulling a prescription pad from his pocket. "But it is manageable. I am prescribing a heavy sedative to calm the aggression and a cognitive stabilizer. He needs to take these 3 times a day. Strictly monitored." He handed a small orange bottle to Tiffany. She took it like it was a holy relic. I knew that smell. I spent 30 years as a first responder. I know what medicine smells like. When Tiffany uncapped the bottle and handed me 2 blue pills and a glass of water, the scent hit me. It was chemical and acrid. These were not stabilizers. These were suppressants, strong ones. The kind they give to violent patients in state wards to turn them into walking zombies. They wanted to drug me into submission so I would be too weak to fight the legal battle they were planning. "Take them," Tiffany said, her voice hardening. "Or do we need to call the orderlies to hold you down?" I looked at Darnell. He was staring at the floor, studying the pattern of the rug. "Son," I said softly, "are you going to let them do this?" Darnell looked up, tears in his eyes, but his jaw was set. "It is for your own good, Dad. Please, just take the medicine." I realized then that appealing to his conscience was useless. His conscience was buried under layers of debt and his wife's manipulation. I had to change tactics. I had to go underground. I reached out and took the pills. My hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of restraining my rage. I put them in my mouth. I took a sip of water. I threw my head back and swallowed loudly. "Good," Tiffany said, relaxing instantly. "See? That wasn't so hard." But I had not swallowed. I had tucked the pills into the pocket of my cheek, a trick I learned from an old inmate I once volunteered with. I sat there for 10 minutes listening to the doctor explain to Darnell how my brain was essentially turning to mush. When they finally went into the kitchen to discuss his fee, I stood up. I walked over to the large potted fern in the corner of the room. It was a beautiful plant, one Viola had nurtured for years. It was vibrant and green. I felt a pang of guilt for what I was about to do, but I needed evidence. I spat the dissolving blue paste into the soil, burying it deep under the dirt with my thumb. "Forgive me, Viola," I whispered. Over the next 2 days, the routine continued. They would watch me take the pills. I would cheek them. I would deposit them in the fern when they were not looking. By Thursday, the fern began to change. The vibrant green leaves turned a sickly yellow. The stems drooped as if the life was being sucked out of them. By Friday, the plant was dead. The leaves were brown and brittle, crumbling to the touch. The poison meant for my brain was powerful enough to kill a living thing in 48 hours. If I had swallowed those pills, I would be drooling on myself right now, unable to sign my name, let alone fight for my life. But I had to sell the performance. If they thought I was lucid, they would keep their guard up. I needed them to think they had won. So I began to fade. I started shuffling when I walked. I let my eyelids droop. When Darnell asked me a question, I would wait 10 seconds before answering, and I would slur my words slightly. I stopped shaving. I let stains stay on my shirt. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. A man spends his whole life building his dignity, and I had to dismantle mine piece by piece to save it. The climax of their cruelty came on Saturday morning. I was sitting in the armchair staring blankly at a turned-off television. I heard them whispering in the hallway. "Do it now," Tiffany hissed. "He is completely out of it. It is perfect." Darnell walked into the room holding his smartphone. He held it up, the red recording light blinking like a demonic eye. He did not look like my son anymore. He looked like a hunter cornering a wounded animal. "Hey, Dad," Darnell said, his voice loud and patronizing like he was talking to a toddler. "Can you tell the camera where you are? I looked at him slowly, letting my head roll to the side. I am in the station, I mumbled deliberately, confusing the past with the present. The bell is ringing, Darnell. The fire is coming. Darnell zoomed in on my face. And do you know who owns this house, Dad? I blinked rapidly, feigning confusion. The bank. No. The smoke. The smoke gets in your eyes. You cannot see the deed when there is smoke. Darnell lowered the phone slightly, a look of triumphant relief washing over his face. He turned to Tiffany, who was standing in the doorway, giving him a thumbs up. Did you get it? She mouthed. Yeah, Darnell whispered. He is talking nonsense. He thinks he's at the fire station. The judge will grant the emergency conservatorship immediately with this footage. He turned back to me. Okay, Dad, you just rest now. We are going to take care of everything. You do not have to worry about money or the house anymore. I closed my eyes and let out a long, ragged sigh, pretending to fall asleep. Darnell stopped recording. I heard them walk into the kitchen. I heard the pop of a champagne cork. They were celebrating. They were toasting to my demise. They were drinking to the fact that Clarence Bishop was finally incompetent, a vegetable ready to be harvested. But under my heavy eyelids, my eyes were sharp and clear. I was not talking nonsense about the fire. I was giving them a warning, but they were too arrogant to hear it. The smoke does get in your eyes. It blinds you to the danger standing right in front of you. Darnell had his video, he had his proof. He thought he was holding the smoking gun that would end my life. He did not realize he was holding the detonator, and I was the one who controlled the explosives. I waited until their laughter died down. Then I slowly reached into the cushion of the armchair. My fingers brushed against the small, hard shape of the burner phone Jasmine had slipped back to me earlier that morning. I was not asleep. I was wide awake, and it was time to wake up the rest of the world. The house was silent, buried under the weight of the lie we were all living. It was 3 a.m, the hour of the wolf, the time when the world is darkest and secrets are hardest to keep. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the settling of the foundation. They thought I was sedated, lost in a chemical fog of the pills I had buried in the dirt. But my mind was sharper than it had been in years. The door handle turned slowly. A sliver of hallway light cut across the floorboards. I did not move. I controlled my breathing, waiting to see if it was my jailer or my savior. Grandpa, a voice whispered. It was barely audible, lighter than a breath. I sat up slowly. Jasmine, I said softly, come in. Close the door. She slipped inside, her silhouette thin and fragile in the darkness. She looked terrified. Her hands were trembling as she sat on the edge of my bed. I reached out and covered her hand with mine. My skin was rough, like old leather against her smooth palm. They are asleep, she whispered. Mom passed out after 2 bottles of wine. Dad is in the office staring at his computer screens. He looks like he is losing his mind, Grandpa. He is not losing it, Jasmine. I said, my voice steady. He sold it a long time ago. I reached under my mattress. I did not need to turn on the lamp. My fingers found the small slit in the fabric I had cut days ago. I pulled out a small silver key. It was not a house key. It was a key to a safety deposit box at the downtown branch of Chase Bank, the one Darnell did not know existed. I pressed the key into her palm. She closed her fingers around it, her eyes wide in the dark. I need you to be brave, baby girl, I said. I need you to do something that might scare you. But it is the only way we save this family. Or what is left of it. What is this? She asked. Tomorrow after school you cannot come straight home, I instructed. You take the bus downtown, go to the bank, ask for box number 402. You are on the access list. I put you on it when you turned 16. Jasmine nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. What is in the box, Grandpa? There is a blue file, I said. It is thick. It has the seal of the city of Chicago on it. Bring it to me. Do not let your mother see it. Do not let your father see it. If they find it, everything is over. She squeezed the key tight. Grandpa, why do you have legal papers hidden downtown? Dad says you are... He says you do not understand money. He says you are just a retired fireman. I let out a low, dry chuckle. It was a sound devoid of humor. Your father sees the uniformed Jasmine. He sees the soot and the sweat. He forgets what I did after I put down the hose. For 12 years, I was the president of the Brotherhood of Firefighters Union. I negotiated contracts for 3,000 men. I sat across the table from mayors, from senators, from corporate lawyers who wanted to cut our pensions to save a nickel. I know how to read a contract, I know how to spot a loophole, and I know exactly when to let an enemy think he has won just so he walks into the trap. Jasmine looked at me with a new expression. It was not just love anymore. It was awe. She had never known this side of me. To her, I was just the old man who grilled ribs on Sundays and played jazz records. She did not know I was a strategist. I need that file, Jasmine, I said, because inside that file is the proof that your father does not own what he thinks he owns, and it is the only shield we have against what is coming. She stood up, slipping the key into the pocket of her pajama pants. I will get it, Grandpa. I promise. Go now, I whispered. Be a ghost. She turned to leave. She opened the door just a crack, and then she froze. From the top of the stairs, a floorboard creaked. It was a distinctive sound, a high-pitched groan that I had been meaning to fix for 20 years. Jasmine stopped breathing. I saw her stiffen. Who is there? Tiffany's voice sliced through the silence. It was slurred, heavy with wine, but sharp with suspicion. Jasmine looked back at me, panic rising in her eyes. I motioned for her to stay calm. I am just getting some water, Mom, Jasmine called out, her voice trembling slightly. There was a long pause. I could hear Tiffany's heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. She stopped outside my door. I slid back under the covers, closing my eyes, slowing my breathing to the rhythm of deep sleep. Water, Tiffany muttered. At 3 a.m. Or are you sneaking in to talk to the vegetable? He is asleep, Mom, Jasmine said, stepping into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind her. I heard the lock click. Don't lie to me, you little brat, Tiffany hissed. I know you are on his side, but guess what? His side is losing. His side is drooling on a pillow while we are about to become very, very rich. Now go to your room before I take your phone away too. I heard Jasmine's footsteps hurry down the hall, followed by the heavy, uneven thud of Tiffany walking to the kitchen. I opened my eyes in the darkness. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my mind was cold ice. Tiffany's arrogance was her weakness. She thought she had already won. She thought I was a vegetable. But the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate a man who has nothing left to lose. I lay there thinking about the next 24 hours. Darnell was desperate. Sterling had walked away. The crypto market was crashing. He had debts he was not telling me about. I could smell the fear on him like smoke. Desperate men make mistakes. Desperate men look for shortcuts. He needed the house. But the deed was in my name, and he knew I would never sign it. So he would have to do the one thing that would destroy him. He would have to forge my signature. He thought he was being clever. He thought he could trace my name on a document, have a notary friend stamp it, and the bank would never know. He did not know about the blue file. He did not know that the property was held in an irrevocable trust that required 3 separate witnesses and a biometric confirmation for any transfer. If he signed my name, he wasn't just committing fraud. He was walking into a federal crime. I closed my eyes, a single tear leaking out. I was not crying for myself. I was crying for the little boy I used to carry on my shoulders. I was crying because I knew that to save my dignity I had to let my son destroy himself. I was the spider, and Darnell was the fly. All I had to do was wait for him to land. The smell of desperation is a very specific thing. In my 30 years with the fire department, I smelled it on arsonists watching their own businesses burn to collect insurance money. It is a mix of sweat, fear, and a manic energy that makes a man do stupid, reckless things. And on that Tuesday evening, my living room reeked of it. Darnell was pacing back and forth, wearing a path into the rug. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and his hair was a mess. He looked like a man who was drowning and was ready to pull anyone down with him just to stay afloat for one more minute. I sat in my armchair, my head lolling to the side, my mouth slightly open. To them, I was a shell. I was the old man whose brain had turned to mush, the father who had been reduced to a piece of furniture. But inside I was clocking every movement, every word, every bead of sweat on my son's forehead. Jasmine had slipped me a note earlier that afternoon while pretending to tie her shoe next to my chair. It was short and terrifying. Sterling is suing for breach of contract. Dad needs $200,000 by Friday or he goes to court. That was the spark. Now I was watching the fire spread. Darnell stopped pacing and looked at Tiffany. She was sitting at the dining table aggressively typing on her laptop. I cannot liquidate the crypto accounts, Darnell said, his voice cracking. The market is down 40%. If I pull out now, we lose everything. I need cash, Tiff. I need real, tangible assets. Tiffany did not look up. Then sell the damn land, Darnell, the plot in Wisconsin, the one the old man talks about whenever he is lucid. My heart skipped a beat, but I forced my breathing to remain shallow and rhythmic. The Wisconsin lot, 5 acres of lakefront property I had bought 20 years ago. It was meant to be my sanctuary. It was where I planned to build a cabin, a place where Viola and I could watch the sunset. After she died, I kept it for the grandkids. It was the only asset I had kept entirely separate from the house. Darnell walked over to the sideboard and pulled out a stack of papers. His hands were shaking so bad he almost dropped them. I drove past the notary today, he muttered. I have the stamp, I just need the signature. He turned slowly and looked at me. I let my eyes drift past him, focusing on a stain on the wallpaper. I started humming a low, tuneless melody, the kind a child makes when they are soothing themselves. It was a performance that broke my heart to give, but I had to be convincing. Darnell walked over and kneeled in front of me. He smelled of stale coffee and panic. Dad, he said, his voice unusually soft. Dad, can you hear me? I blinked slowly, taking 5 seconds to focus on his face. Who is there? Is that you? Walter? Walter was my brother who died in 1990. Darnell flinched, guilt flashing across his face for a split second before necessity washed it away. No, Dad. It is Darnell, your son. Listen, we need to handle some paperwork. For the insurance. Remember, we need to make sure you are taken care of. He placed the document on the small table next to me. It was a quitclaim deed transferring the ownership of the Wisconsin property to Darnell Bishop. I looked at the paper, then I looked at him. I saw the little boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. I saw the teenager I taught to drive. And now I saw a criminal. Do you trust me, Dad? Darnell asked, pushing a pen into my hand. I let the pen sit loosely in my fingers. I looked him dead in the eye, and for a second I let the fog clear. I wanted him to see me, but he was too blinded by greed. I trust the family, I mumbled, slurring the words together. Darnell took that as a yes. He guided my hand toward the paper. Just make your mark, Dad, just right here. I let my hand go limp. The pen slipped and made a jagged line across the page. I dropped it, letting it clatter to the floor, and leaned back, closing my eyes as if the effort had exhausted me. I am tired, Walter, I whispered. Darnell stared at the jagged line. It was useless. It looked nothing like a signature. He cursed under his breath, a vicious, ugly sound. He picked up the pen. He looked at the kitchen door to make sure Jasmine wasn't around. He didn't know she was sitting at the top of the stairs, her phone camera pointed through the banister rails, recording every second of this betrayal. Fine, Darnell hissed. If you cannot do it, I will help you. He did not guide my hand this time. He didn't bother. He placed the paper on a magazine, hunched over it, and began to write. I watched through the slit of my eyelids as my son, my own flesh and blood, carefully forged the signature Clarence Bishop at the bottom of the deed. He even added the little flourish I used to do on the letter B. He had practiced this. He sat back admiring his handiwork. He blew on the ink to dry it. Done, he whispered. Tiffany walked into the room. She snatched the paper from his hand and inspected it. It looks shaky, she said critically. It looks like an old man signed it, Darnell snapped. It is perfect. I will file this electronically tonight. We will have the bridge loan by Thursday morning. Sterling gets his money and we keep the house. Tiffany smiled. It was a smile that made my blood run cold. She walked over to the liquor cabinet and poured 2 glasses of the expensive scotch I had been saving for my 75th birthday. She handed a glass to Darnell and raised hers in a toast. To the future, she said. Darnell looked at me, then at the glass. To the future. They clinked glasses. The sound was sharp and cheerful, completely out of place in a room where a crime had just been committed. Tiffany took a long sip and looked at me with pure disdain. You know, babe, she said, swirling the amber liquid. This is actually for the best. Once we sell that useless plot of land and get the cash, we can finally look into putting him in that facility in Gary, the one with the state subsidy. Darnell stiffened. Tiff, we talked about this. That place is a dump. It is affordable, Darnell. Tiffany shouted, her voice suddenly shrill. And I am done running a nursing home here. Look at him. He does not even know where he is. He thinks you are his dead brother. He is a vegetable, Darnell. A useless, drooling vegetable. She walked over and stood right in front of me. She leaned down, her face inches from mine. I could smell the wine and the expensive perfume. Finally, she whispered loud enough for Darnell to hear, but intimate enough to feel like a violation. Finally, we are getting rid of the old man and his junk. No more old records, no more dusty clothes, no more burden. She stood up and laughed. We are free, Darnell. We are finally free. Darnell drank his scotch in one gulp. He looked at me one last time, a flicker of something that might have been regret, but was probably just relief. Yeah, he said softly. We are free. They walked out of the room, heading to the study to upload the stolen deed. They left me sitting in the dark, the taste of their betrayal bitter in the air. I sat there for a long time. I listened to their muffled laughter through the wall. They were celebrating their victory. They were celebrating the money they thought they had just stolen. But they forgot one detail, one tiny, crucial detail that I had buried in the fine print of the trust 10 years ago. The Wisconsin property was not just land. It was designated as a conservation easement held in a trust. To sell it or to transfer the deed, you did not just need a signature. You needed a biometric thumbprint verification and 2 independent witnesses present at the signing. Darnell had just uploaded a document to the county clerk that was not only void, but was physical proof of felony forgery. And he had done it from his own IP address, and Jasmine had it all on video. I stopped humming. I sat up straight in my chair. I picked up the glass of water from the side table and took a sip. My hand was as steady as a rock. They were drinking scotch to celebrate their freedom, but they did not realize that the ink on that paper wasn't a signature. It was a confession, and tomorrow the judge was going to read it. I looked at the spot where Tiffany had stood. Getting rid of the old man and his junk, I repeated to myself. I looked at my hands. These hands had broken down doors to save children. These hands had built this house. These hands had held Viola as she took her last breath. I am not junk, I whispered to the empty room. I am the landslide, and you are standing at the bottom of the hill. Information is like oxygen. You cannot see it, but if you control the flow, you control the fire. And inside that house, while my son and his wife were popping corks and celebrating their felony, I was holding the match that would burn their entire fantasy to the ground. Wednesday morning was gray and heavy. The rain lashed against the windows, matching the mood inside the house. Darnell was manic. He was running on adrenaline and caffeine, pacing the hallway, refreshing his email every 10 seconds, waiting for the bridge loan to clear based on the forged deed. He looked terrible. His eyes were sunken, his skin pale. He was a man walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers, and he didn't even know who the snakes were. I was sitting in my room staring at the rain when the vibration buzzed against my leg. It was the burner phone tucked into my sock. I waited until I heard Tiffany start the shower in the master bathroom and Darnell go downstairs to answer the door for a pizza delivery. I pulled the phone out. There was a secure message from a number I had saved simply as Miller. Miller was a private investigator I had hired 3 weeks ago, long before the slap, long before the pills. I had hired him the day I noticed $50 missing from my wallet. It wasn't the money. It was the principle. I wanted to know who I was living with. I met Miller at a diner on the south side, a place where the coffee is strong and nobody asks questions. I gave him $5,000 cash and a picture of Tiffany. I told him to dig. I told him to find the bones she was trying to bury. I opened the message. It contained a link to a cloud folder. My thumbs were clumsy on the small screen, but I managed to open it. There were 20 photos and a transcript of text messages. The first photo made my stomach turn. It was Tiffany. She wasn't at yoga, and she wasn't at the charity luncheon she claimed to attend every Tuesday. She was sitting at a corner table in a dimly lit bar downtown. Her hand was resting on the arm of a man who was definitely not my son. He was young, maybe 30, with slicked back hair and an expensive watch. In the next photo, they were kissing. But infidelity was common. I had seen enough of it in my lifetime. It was the text messages that revealed the true nature of the predator living under my roof. I scrolled through the screenshots Miller had intercepted. Text from Tiffany to Brad. The idiot just uploaded the deed. We should have the liquidity by Friday. Text from Brad. Are you sure the old man won't talk? Text from Tiffany. He is a vegetable. I have him so drugged up he thinks he is back in the 70s. Darnell is the problem. He is getting cold feet. He feels guilty. Text from Brad. Don't let him ruin this, Tiff. We need that cash for the Cabo property. Monday morning we are gone. Text from Tiffany. Don't worry. As soon as the wire hits the joint account, I am transferring it to the offshore shell. Darnell will be left with the debt, the old man, and a lawsuit. We will be drinking margaritas by sunset. I lowered the phone. The air in the room felt suddenly cold. I looked at the door. I could hear Darnell downstairs arguing with the pizza delivery guy about the tip. My son. My foolish, greedy, weak son. He was selling his soul to please a woman who was sharpening the knife to slit his throat. He thought he was the mastermind. He thought he was the one taking control of the family legacy. But he was just the getaway driver for a robbery where he was the only victim. A wave of instinct washed over me. The father in me wanted to run downstairs. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders, shake him, and shove the phone in his face. I wanted to scream, "Look at who you betrayed me for. She is stealing everything. Stop the transfer." I actually stood up. I took a step toward the door, and then I stopped. I remembered the slap. I remembered the feeling of the floor hitting my knees when he knocked me down. I remembered him forging my name without a second of hesitation. If I saved him now, what would he learn? If I showed him the truth, he would be hurt, yes, but he would still be the man who hit his father. He would still be the man who tried to put me in a state home. He would just be a victim of Tiffany. He would blame her for everything. He would never take responsibility for his own sins. Saving him now would be the worst thing I could do. Darnell needed to lose. He needed to lose the money. He needed to lose the house. He needed to lose the woman he thought was his prize. He needed to stand in the ashes of his life and realize that he was the one who struck the match. I sat back down. I deleted the message from the phone, but not before forwarding a copy to my lawyer's secure server. The door opened. Darnell walked in holding a slice of pepperoni pizza on a paper plate. He looked trying to be casual, but his smile was tight and forced. "Hey, Dad," he said, putting the plate on the nightstand. "Thought you might be hungry. Tiffany says we should keep you on a strict diet, but, well, one slice won't hurt." He looked at me, searching for a sign of the father he used to know. "We are almost there, Dad," he whispered. "By Friday, everything is going to be better. I am going to buy you a new TV, a big one." I looked at him. I looked at the man who was about to be destroyed. "Thank you, son," I said. My voice was clear. It wasn't the mumble of a senile man. Darnell paused, surprised by my clarity. "You are welcome," he said uncertainly. "Enjoy your pizza, Darnell," I said, picking up my book. "Enjoy every bite." He lingered for a moment, sensing something was different, but the pull of his own delusion was too strong. He nodded and left the room, closing the door. I listened to his footsteps fading away. I took a bite of the pizza. It was cold. I knew something Darnell didn't. I knew that the wire transfer from the bridge loan wouldn't go through on Friday, because the account connected to that forged deed didn't exist anymore. But Tiffany didn't know that. Darnell didn't know that. When Friday came, the trap would snap. And when Darnell looked around for his wife to comfort him, he would find an empty closet and a one-way ticket to Mexico. I chewed slowly. The truth is a heavy meal. But my son was going to have to eat every single crumb of it. The betrayal was coming, and I was going to let it happen. Because sometimes you have to let the building burn down to the foundation before you can rebuild it right. Friday morning arrived with the color of bruised steel. The sky was heavy and low, pressing down on the roof I had shingled with my own hands 20 years ago. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, folding my few remaining shirts into a small cardboard suitcase Darnell had thrown at me. He did not even have the decency to give me a real bag. He told me we were going on a little vacation. He called it the Whispering Pines. He said it was a luxury retreat where I could get my strength back. I knew exactly what the Whispering Pines was. It was a state-funded warehouse for the forgotten on the edge of the industrial district. It was a place where they sedated you at noon just so they did not have to listen to you ask for water. Darnell was not sending me to a spa. He was taking me to the landfill. "Ready to go, Dad?" Darnell asked from the doorway. He was wearing sunglasses indoors, probably to hide the circles under his eyes. He had not slept in 2 days waiting for that loan money to hit his account. He was vibrating with nervous energy. I looked at him. I held up my old Bible, the leather cover worn smooth by Viola's hands. "Is Viola coming?" I asked, keeping my voice frail and confused. Darnell flinched. He looked away, shifting his weight. "No, Dad. She is waiting for you there. It is going to be great. Just come on. We have to beat traffic." I stood up slowly. I let him take my arm. He gripped it too tight, like he was afraid I might bolt, but I had no intention of running. You cannot spring a trap if you are not standing on the trigger. We walked down the hallway. I dragged my feet, letting them scuff against the hardwood floors. I looked at the empty spaces on the walls where the pictures used to be. Tiffany had already sold the frames. The house felt hollow, stripped of its soul. But a house is just wood and plaster. The home was something I carried inside me, and that was something they could never sell. When we stepped out onto the porch, the air was cold. Jasmine was standing by the railing, hugging her elbows. She was wearing her school uniform, but she hadn't left for the bus. Her eyes were red and puffy. She looked at me, terrified that this was the end. She thought she was losing her grandfather forever. Darnell tried to steer me past her toward his idling car. "Say goodbye to Grandpa Jasmine. He will be back. Eventually." I stopped. I planted my feet like tree roots. I was not going to be shoved into a car without acknowledging my soldier. I pulled my arm free from Darnell's grip and stepped toward her. I reached out and cupped her face in my hands. Her skin was warm and a single tear tracked through the dust on my thumb. "Be a good girl, Jasmine," I said loud enough for Darnell to hear. Then I leaned in close, putting my lips right next to her ear. My voice dropped to a whisper, sharp as a razor. "Start it up, baby girl." She blinked and I saw the fear in her eyes turn into steel. She gave a microscopic nod. She understood. The file was safe. The lawyer was ready. The moment the car doors locked, the countdown would begin. "Dad, let's go," Darnell shouted, honking the horn. I stepped back. I gave her a wink, the same wink I used to give her when I snuck her extra candy when she was 5. Then I turned and walked to the car. I climbed into the passenger seat. The car smelled of fast food wrappers and Darnell's cheap air freshener. As he put the car in gear and pulled out of the driveway, I did not look at him. I turned my head and looked out the window. I watched my house recede in the distance. The azalea bushes I planted for Viola were blooming red against the gray siding. The porch swing was swaying slightly in the wind. A lesser man might have cried. A lesser man might have felt pity for himself being driven away from his kingdom by his own traitorous son. But I did not feel sadness. I looked at that house the way a general looks at a battlefield before he orders the retreat. I was surrendering the ground to draw the enemy out into the open. I was giving them the confidence to make their final mistake. Darnell turned on the radio to drown out the silence. He was humming along, tapping on the steering wheel, thinking he had won. He thought he was driving a senile old man to prison. He did not know he was driving a Trojan horse. I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the cold glass. "Take me to the warehouse, son. Lock me up. Take my keys, because the harder you slam that door, the louder it is going to sound when I kick it back open." The sign on the door said Whispering Pines, but as soon as the automatic doors slid shut behind me, I knew I was in a warehouse for the living dead. The air was thick and humid, smelling of industrial-strength bleach, trying to mask the scent of urine and boiled cabbage. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering like a dying heartbeat. This was not a care facility. It was a holding pen where families dropped off their guilt, so they did not have to look at it anymore. A nurse with a sour expression and stains on her scrubs pointed me to a room at the end of the hall. She did not ask my name. She just looked at the clipboard Darnell had handed her. "Bed 4, she barked, not even looking me in the eye. "Give me your belt and your shoelaces. Policy for new admits." I looked at her. I did not argue. I slowly unbuckled my belt and handed it over. I sat down and unlaced my shoes. I handed those over too. "Dinner is at 5, she said, tossing my things into a plastic bin. "If you miss it, you starve. Do not cause trouble or we sedate you. We do not have time for nonsense here." She slammed the door, leaving me in a room with peeling beige paint and 2 other beds. In the bed next to me lay a man who looked like a skeleton wrapped in parchment paper. He was curled in a fetal position, sobbing softly into his pillow. I sat on the thin plastic-covered mattress. It crinkled every time I moved. I looked at my hands. They were the only things in this room that still felt like mine. Darnell thought he had thrown me away. He thought this place would break me. He forgot that I spent 20 years crawling into burning buildings while everyone else was running out. I know how to breathe in toxic environments. I know how to stay calm when the roof is caving in. I stood up and walked over to the weeping man. I placed a hand on his shoulder. It was sharp and bony. "Easy, soldier," I said, my voice low and steady. "You are going to be all right." The man stopped crying and looked up at me with watery, terrified eyes. He had not heard a kind voice in a long time. They stole my watch," he whispered. "My son gave it to me. I squeezed his shoulder. We will get it back, I lied. But it was a lie he needed to hear. Right now, we just need to survive the night. I spent the next 3 hours watching. I watched the staff. Most were indifferent, overworked, and underpaid. But there was one young man, an orderly named Mateo. He was different. I saw him gently help a woman in a wheelchair drink her water when the nurse ignored her. I saw him wince when the head nurse yelled at a patient for spilling soup. He had kind eyes, tired but kind. He was a good man trapped in a bad system. He was my way out. Around 8 o'clock, the hallway lights dimmed. The night shift was starting. Mateo came into our room with a mop bucket. He looked exhausted. Hey, Pops, he said softly, starting to mop the floor. Sorry about the smell. The ventilation is broken again. I sat up. I did not speak to him like a patient. I spoke to him like a supervisor. You handle that mop like a rookie, son, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. You are using too much water. You are just spreading the dirt around. Mateo stopped and looked at me surprised. He let out a short, dry laugh. Yeah. Well, nobody trained me. They just handed me the bucket. I stood up and walked over to him. I took the mop handle. Let me show you. Figure 8 motion. Keeps the dirt in the front. I mopped a small section of the floor. Mateo watched, amused and impressed. You used to be a janitor, he asked. I was a fire captain, I said, handing the mop back. And before you save lives, you learn to clean the station. Discipline starts with a clean floor. Mateo looked at me differently then. The pity in his eyes vanished, replaced by respect. He saw the man, not the patient. What are you doing here, Captain? He asked. You do not seem like the usual dementia cases we get. I am not, I said, locking eyes with him. My son put me here to steal my house. He thinks I am helpless. Mateo sighed and leaned against the door frame. He looked down at his shoes. I see that a lot. I am sorry, man. Truly. I stepped closer to him. I do not need your pity, Mateo. I need your phone. He stiffened. He looked at the camera in the hallway, then back at me. I cannot do that, Captain. I could get fired. Strictly against protocol. I put a hand on his arm. I am not asking you to break the law. I am asking you to help me stop a crime. I have a granddaughter out there who is fighting this battle alone right now. I just need to send one text, one signal. I looked deep into his eyes. I saw the struggle. I saw the boy who probably had a grandfather he loved. If you were in this bed, Mateo, I whispered, and someone took everything you worked for, would you want a good man to turn his back on you? Mateo bit his lip. He looked at the hallway again. It was empty. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cracked smartphone. He unlocked it and handed it to me. You have 2 minutes, he whispered. If anyone comes, you were showing me a picture of your grandkids. I took the phone. My fingers flew across the screen. I did not text Jasmine. She was already in motion. I texted the secure number of my attorney, Mr. Thompson. The message was 3 words long: execute the freeze. I hit send. I watched the little check mark appear. Done. I deleted the message and handed the phone back to Mateo. Thank you, son, I said. You just saved a life tonight. Mateo slipped the phone back into his pocket. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and admiration. Good luck, Captain. He picked up his bucket and left the room. I sat back down on the crinkling mattress. The smell of bleach was still strong, but it did not bother me anymore. I closed my eyes. Phase 2 was active. Somewhere in the city, digital locks were slamming shut. Bank accounts were turning to stone. Assets were vanishing from the grid. Darnell was probably at home right now, sleeping in my bed, dreaming of the millions he was going to make. He did not know that the ground beneath him had just opened up. I lay down and pulled the thin, scratchy blanket up to my chin. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. I was in hell, yes, but I was the one holding the pitchfork. While I was staring at a bowl of cold oatmeal in a room that smelled of despair, my son was walking into the downtown branch of Chase Bank. I was not there to see it, but I know Darnell. I know how he walks when he thinks he has won. He would have pushed through the revolving doors with his chest out, ignoring the security guard clutching his briefcase like it held the nuclear codes. He was about to withdraw the first installment of the bridge loan, the money he had secured by forging my signature on a deed he had no right to touch. He walked up to the teller window. He probably gave her that charming smile, the one he used to use on his mother when he wanted money for a new video game. He slid his ID and the withdrawal slip across the marble counter. $200,000. He needed it in a cashier's check payable to James Sterling. He was in a rush. He had been checking his watch every 30 seconds, terrified that the loan sharks or Sterling's lawyers would call before he had the cash in hand. I imagine the teller was polite at first. She took his ID. She typed his account number into her computer. Darnell drummed his fingers on the counter, already spending the money in his head. He was probably thinking about how he would explain the sudden influx of cash to Tiffany, or maybe he was planning which luxury car he would buy once the crypto market rebounded. But then the typing stopped. The silence that follows the stopping of a bank teller's fingers is the loudest silence in the world. Darnell likely leaned forward. Is there a problem, he would have asked, his voice tight. The teller did not answer immediately. She frowned at the screen. She typed something else. Then she picked up the phone. "I need a manager to window 4, she whispered, but Darnell heard it. His heart must have hammered against his ribs. He was a thief, and thieves are always waiting for the siren. But he told himself to stay calm. He had the power of attorney. He had the medical records. He was the legal guardian. He was in charge. The branch manager walked over. He was a serious man with gray hair, the kind of man who has seen every scam in the book. He looked at the screen, then he looked at Darnell. He did not smile. "Mr. Bishop," the manager asked. "Yes," Darnell said, straightening his tie. "I am in a bit of a hurry. I have a business meeting in 20 minutes. I am afraid we cannot process this transaction," the manager said calmly. "What do you mean?" Darnell demanded, his voice rising. "The funds were wired this morning. I saw the confirmation. The funds were flagged," the manager replied. "This account has been frozen due to a report of fraudulent activity." Fraudulent? Darnell laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "That is ridiculous. I am the account holder. Well, my father is, but I am his conservator. I have the court order right here." He reached into his briefcase to pull out the papers based on the lies he and Tiffany had spun. "That is actually the problem," Mr. Bishop, the manager said, folding his hands. "The alert did not come from the bank. It came from the legal owner of the property." Darnell froze. "My father is in a nursing home. He does not even know what day it is. He could not have reported anything." The manager shook his head. "The property in Wisconsin is not owned by Clarence Bishop personally. It is owned by the Bishop Family Revocable Trust, and according to the bylaws of that trust, which were updated 10 years ago, there is a specific clause regarding incapacitation." Darnell stopped breathing. He did not know about the trust. He had never bothered to read the fine print of my life. He just saw assets. He never looked for the protections. The manager turned the screen slightly, though Darnell could not read it. "The clause states that if the primary beneficiary, Clarence Bishop, is declared mentally incompetent or incapacitated, control of the trust does not pass to family members. It immediately transfers to an independent successor trustee." Darnell felt the floor drop out from under him. "Successor trustee? Who?" "A law firm," the manager said. "Thompson and Associates. They were notified automatically when you filed the medical incapacitation paperwork with the county yesterday. By declaring your father incompetent to get control of his house, you inadvertently triggered the clause that removed you from the trust entirely." The irony must have tasted like ash in his mouth. The very weapon he used to bury me was the same weapon that just cut his throat. By proving I was crazy, he proved he had no right to the money. "This is a mistake," Darnell shouted, drawing the attention of everyone in the lobby. "I am his son. I am his only heir. The trust is quite specific, sir," the manager said, his voice dropping to a warning tone. "It was designed to protect the assets from exploitation. The trustee has flagged the deed transfer you attempted as potential fraud. They have locked all associated accounts pending a federal investigation." Federal investigation. Those two words hit Darnell like a physical blow. He wasn't just broke. He was a suspect. "I need to speak to my father," Darnell stammered, backing away from the counter. "I would not advise that," the manager said. "The police are on their way to collect a statement regarding the forged signature on the deed. The trustee provided a biometric analysis. The signature does not match Mr. Bishop's hand." Darnell did not wait for the police. He turned and ran. He ran out of the bank, past the security guard, and into the rain. He left his dignity on the marble floor. He sat in his car, hyperventilating, his hands shaking so hard he could barely put the key in the ignition. He had walked in there a millionaire. He walked out a fugitive. I sat in my room at the nursing home watching the rain streak against the window. I did not need to see his face to know what he looked like. I knew he was terrified. I knew he was calling Tiffany right now, screaming that something had gone wrong. I took a bite of the cold oatmeal. It suddenly tasted sweet. My trap had sprung. The steel jaws had snapped shut. Darnell was running, but he did not realize that the road he was running on led straight off a cliff. And I was the one who had removed the guardrails. The rain was hammering against the roof of the house I built with my own hands, but the real storm was happening inside the living room. I was not there in the flesh, but I saw every second of it. I saw it through the lens of my granddaughter's smartphone camera. Jasmine had positioned herself at the top of the stairs, filming through the banister rails just as I had taught her to do. She was the silent witness to the self-destruction of a man who thought he could outrun his own shadow. Darnell burst through the front door like a man chased by wolves. He was soaked to the bone, his expensive suit clinging to him, ruined by the weather and his own panic. He didn't even close the door behind him. The wind blew rain into the foyer, soaking the hardwood floors, but he didn't care. He ran into the living room, his eyes wild and desperate. Tiffany was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up, annoyed by the intrusion, completely unaware that her golden parachute had just failed to open. "Where is the champagne?" she asked, not even looking at his face. "Did the transfer clear?" Darnell threw his briefcase across the room. It hit the wall with a sickening thud, cracking the plaster. Tiffany jumped, spilling wine on the white carpet. "There is no transfer," Darnell screamed, his voice cracking. "There is no money. It is gone. Tiffany, it is all gone." Tiffany stood up slowly, her face hardening. "What are you talking about? What do you mean, gone?" "The account is frozen," Darnell shouted, pacing back and forth, pulling at his wet hair. "The bank locked everything. They know Tiffany, they know about the signature, they know about the deed. The trust flagged it immediately." Tiffany's eyes narrowed. "What trust?" "The old man doesn't have a trust. He is just a retired fireman with a pension." "He does have a trust," Darnell yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the ceiling. "And because we declared him incompetent, because we dragged him to that nursing home, the trust kicked me out. I am not the beneficiary anymore. A law firm is. And they are calling the police, Tiffany. They are calling the feds." The room went silent. The only sound was Darnell's ragged breathing and the rain hitting the windows. Tiffany looked at him, and for the first time I saw the mask slip completely. The sweet, supportive wife vanished. In her place stood a cold, calculating predator who realized her prey had no meat left on the bone. "You idiot," she whispered. "You absolute incompetent idiot." Darnell stopped pacing. He looked at her, stunned. "What did you call me? I called you an idiot," she spat, her voice rising. "You had one job, Darnell. One job. Get the signature and get the money. And you failed. You did not check the paperwork. You did not do your due diligence. You just blindly assumed you could walk in there and take it." "I did this for you," Darnell screamed, his face turning red. "I did everything you wanted. I put my father in a home for you. I forged his signature because you said we needed the cash for the Cabo house. I broke the law for you. Don't you dare put this on me," Tiffany countered, stepping closer to him, her eyes flashing with venom. "I did not hold the pen, Darnell. You did. You are the one who committed a felony. I am just a supportive wife who wanted the best for her family. If you go down alone." Darnell looked like he had been slapped. He stared at the woman he had betrayed his blood for, and finally he began to see what I had seen from the very beginning. "I hit him," Darnell whispered, his voice trembling. "I hit my own father, in this kitchen. I slapped a 73-year-old man in the face because you told me he was holding us back. I treated him like a dog. I threw him in a warehouse to rot. And now you are telling me I am on my own." Tiffany laughed. It was a cruel, hollow sound. "Oh, grow up, Darnell. Nobody forced you to do anything. You did it because you are weak. You are a weak man who has lived off his daddy's money his whole life, and when the tap ran dry, you panicked. You are not a businessman. You are a loser. And I am not going to prison for a loser." She turned and started walking toward the stairs, planning to pack her bags, planning to run. But Darnell grabbed her arm. Not aggressively, but desperately. "We are in this together, Tiff. We signed the papers together. The witness logs." "I didn't sign anything," she shrieked, ripping her arm away. "I made sure of that. Your name is on the deed, Darnell. Your name is on the medical power of attorney. I am just the bystander." Darnell stood there, water dripping from his nose, looking at the empty space where his wife used to be. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had burned down his fortress to keep her warm, and she was leaving him in the ashes. "You are a monster," Darnell whispered. "And you," Tiffany said, looking down at him from the first step of the staircase, "are broke. And I don't do broke." Up at the top of the stairs, Jasmine's hand was shaking, but she did not drop the phone. She captured every word. She captured the confession. She captured the admission of the forgery. She captured the admission of the assault. Darnell sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. He began to sob. It wasn't the cry of a man who was sorry for what he had done. It was the cry of a man who was sorry he had been caught. He was crying for himself, but the camera was still rolling. Jasmine zoomed in on his shaking shoulders. "I forged it," Darnell sobbed into the empty room, unaware he was speaking to a jury. "I forged the signature. I lied to the doctors. I did it all." Those 4 sentences were the final nails in his coffin. Tiffany stomped past Jasmine on the landing, too focused on her own escape to notice her daughter standing in the shadows. She went into the bedroom and started throwing suitcases onto the bed. I watched the video clip on the burner phone in my room at the nursing home. Mateo, the orderly, was standing guard at the door. I watched my son collapse under the weight of his own greed. I watched the woman who poisoned his mind reveal her true nature. It was a tragedy. It was a Greek tragedy playing out in the suburbs of Chicago. But I did not look away. I watched it 3 times. Then I forwarded the video to Mr. Thompson, my lawyer. The evidence was secured. The confession was recorded. Darnell thought he was having a bad day. He thought the frozen bank account was the worst thing that could happen to him. He didn't know that outside the house, just down the street, a black sedan was parking. He didn't know that the police were not just coming for a statement, they were coming with handcuffs. I put the phone down and looked out at the parking lot of the nursing home. The rain was stopping. The storm was breaking. My son had made his choice. He chose the quick money over the long road. He chose the shiny lie over the hard truth. And now he was going to learn the lesson I tried to teach him when he was a boy. You can run from your father. You can run from your past, but you cannot run from the consequences of your own handwriting. I lay back on the pillow. I was ready to go home. But first I had to watch the final act. And I had a front row seat. The Cook County Courthouse smells like floor wax, stale coffee, and bad decisions. It is a place where lies come to die. But on that Monday morning, my son and his wife walked in thinking it was where their lies would finally become truth. I was not in the room when the bailiff called the court to order. I was waiting in the holding area just beyond the heavy oak doors, adjusting my tie in the reflection of a vending machine. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, stood next to me. He checked his watch and gave me a sharp nod. It was time. Inside the courtroom, Darnell and Tiffany sat at the plaintiff's table. They looked like the picture of a grieving, burdened family. Tiffany was wearing a modest beige dress and pearls, trying to look like the dutiful daughter-in-law who was just trying to do the right thing. She held a tissue in her hand, dabbing at eyes that were completely dry. Darnell was in a navy suit, looking solemn, though I knew his leg was bouncing under the table, a nervous tic he had had since he was 10 years old. They were there to finalize the emergency conservatorship. They were there to tell Judge Marilyn Vance that Clarence Bishop was a danger to himself, a senile old man who needed to be locked away so they could bravely manage his assets. They had the paperwork from their corrupt doctor. They had the video of me speaking nonsense. They thought it was a formality. They thought I was still sitting in a wheelchair at Whispering Pines, staring at a wall. I heard Darnell's lawyer, a cheap shark named Gorski, start his opening statement. "Your Honor," he droned, "this is a tragic case of rapid cognitive decline. Mr. Bishop has become aggressive, confused, and unable to care for himself. His son Darnell simply wants to ensure his father is safe and his estate is preserved. We have medical affidavits confirming advanced dementia." The judge shuffled some papers. "I see the report here from a Dr. Thorne. Is the doctor present? He is unavailable." "Your Honor," Gorski said quickly, "but his sworn statement is in the file." The judge nodded. "And where is Mr. Bishop today?" "He is at a care facility," Gorski said. "He is too unstable to attend. We didn't want to upset him. That was my cue." Mr. Thompson pushed the double doors open. They made a heavy groaning sound that echoed through the high-ceilinged room. "Actually, Your Honor," Mr. Thompson boomed, his voice filling the space, "Mr. Bishop is right here, and he is very upset indeed." I stepped into the courtroom. I was not wearing the stained sweatpants from the nursing home. I was wearing my charcoal three-piece suit, the one I wore to receive the Medal of Valor in 1992. My shoes were shined to a mirror finish. My back was straight. I walked with the cane, but I did not lean on it. I used it like a scepter. The sound of Darnell gasping was audible from the back of the room. He spun around in his chair, his eyes bulging out of his head. Tiffany froze her hand halfway to her mouth, the tissue forgotten. I walked down the center aisle. The click of my heels on the marble floor was a metronome counting down to their destruction. I looked Darnell dead in the eye. I didn't look angry. I looked ready. I stopped at the defense table and remained standing. Next to me was not just Mr. Thompson, but another man. A tall, serious man with silver hair and a stethoscope around his neck. "Who is this?" Judge Vance asked, peering over her glasses. "I am Clarence Bishop, Your Honor," I said. My voice was deep, clear, and steady. It was the voice that used to command 300 firefighters at a 4-alarm blaze. And I am here to prove that the only thing sick in my family is my son's ambition. Darnell stood up, knocking his chair back. This is a trick. He is off his meds. He is dangerous." "Sit down, Mr. Bishop," the judge barked, slamming her gavel. "Your Honor," Mr. Thompson said calmly, "we would like to introduce Dr. Benjamin Hayes into the record. Dr. Hayes is the chief of neurology at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. He conducted a full, independent psychiatric and neurological evaluation of my client yesterday afternoon." Darnell turned pale. Northwestern was not a country club clinic. It was the best hospital in the city. You could not bribe the chief of neurology. The judge looked at the doctor. "Dr. Hayes, what are your findings?" Dr. Hayes stood up. "Your Honor, I ran a full battery of cognitive tests, including an MRI scan. Mr. Bishop shows 0 signs of dementia or Alzheimer's. His cognitive functions are that of a man 20 years younger. He is sharp, lucid, and entirely capable of making his own decisions. The previous diagnosis provided by the plaintiff is not just incorrect, it is medically impossible based on the brain scans I have right here." Tiffany let out a small, strangled noise. She was watching her getaway car drive off a cliff. But the video," Darnell stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "We have video of him rambling. He didn't know where he was. He was hallucinating." I turned to the judge. "May I speak, Your Honor?" She nodded. "Go ahead, Mr. Bishop." I turned slowly to face Darnell. "I did not hallucinate, son. I was acting. Just like you were acting like a loving son while you were stealing the deed to my land." "Objection," Gorski shouted. "Speculation. Overruled," the judge said, leaning forward. "Continue." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside were the blue pills Tiffany had forced me to take. They tried to drug me. "Your Honor," I said, holding the bag up for the bailiff to see. "They hired a doctor to prescribe high doses of heavy sedatives to induce the very symptoms they claimed I had. But I didn't swallow them. I hid them in the potted fern in my living room. If you send a forensic team to my house, you will find enough chemical residue in that soil to kill a horse." I looked at Tiffany. She was shaking her head frantically, mouthing, "No, no, no." I played the fool. I continued, my voice rising slightly with controlled emotion, because I needed to see how far they would go. I needed to see if there was any part of my son left that would hesitate before he threw me in a warehouse to rot. I gave him every chance to stop. I gave him every chance to be a man. Instead, he forged my signature on a property deed 3 days ago. I nodded to Mr. Thompson. He handed a file to the judge. "This is the biometric analysis of the signature on the quitclaim deed filed last Tuesday," Thompson said. "And this is Mr. Bishop's actual signature verified by the bank. They are not a match. And here is the IP address log showing the document was uploaded from Darnell Bishop's laptop at the residence." The judge flipped through the pages. Her face grew darker with every page turn. She looked at the fake medical report. She looked at the forged deed. Then she looked at Darnell and Tiffany. It was a look of pure disgust. "Mr. Gorski," the judge said, her voice icy, "I suggest you sit your clients down and tell them to remain silent. Because from where I am sitting, this looks less like a conservatorship hearing and more like a criminal conspiracy." Darnell slumped into his chair. He looked small. He looked like a child who had been caught stealing from the collection plate. He looked at me, pleading with his eyes, begging me to stop. But the train had left the station. I had endured the slap. I had endured the insults. I had endured the nights in that cold nursing home bed. I looked back at him, and I did not blink. I am not senile, Darnell, I said, my voice echoing in the silent courtroom. I am just disappointed. The judge slammed the gavel down. Motion for conservatorship denied with prejudice, she declared. And bailiff, please lock the doors. I believe the district attorney is going to want to have a conversation with the plaintiffs before they leave this building. Darnell put his head on the table. Tiffany started crying, real tears this time. Tears of a woman who realized she wasn't going to Cabo. She was going to jail. I buttoned my suit jacket. I thanked Dr. Hayes. I thanked Mr. Thompson. I stood tall. The air in the courtroom suddenly smelled cleaner. The scent of floor wax was gone, replaced by the crisp, cool scent of justice. I had returned from the dead, and I had brought the reckoning with me. The judge had banged her gavel, signaling the end of the conservatorship hearing, but the destruction of my son's world was only halfway complete. I stood there adjusting my cufflinks, watching the color return to Darnell's face. He looked like a man who had just survived a firing squad, believing that the worst was over. He thought that because the judge had denied the motion, he could simply go home, lick his wounds, and perhaps try to salvage his marriage. He did not know that the woman standing next to him had already packed her bags, not for a trip with him, but for a life without him. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, cleared his throat. It was a sound that cut through the murmur of the courtroom like a knife. Your Honor, Thompson said, his voice grave. Before this court adjourns, there is a secondary matter regarding the welfare of the minor child, Jasmine Bishop, and significant evidence of financial fraud that directly impacts the assets of this family. Judge Vance paused, her hand hovering over her water glass. She looked at Thompson, then at Tiffany. I am listening, counselor. Tiffany stiffened. Her eyes darted toward the exit signs. She knew. She knew that the walls were closing in. Thompson walked over to the evidence table. He did not hold up a medical file this time. He held up a thick stack of bank statements and a series of photographs printed on high-gloss paper. In the course of defending Mr. Bishop against these false claims of dementia, Thompson began, we employed a forensic accountant and a private investigator to understand the urgency behind the plaintiff's request for control over my client's assets. Mr. Darnell Bishop claimed he needed the money to cover bad investments in the cryptocurrency market. However, our investigation reveals that the money did not vanish into the blockchain. Thompson walked over to Darnell and dropped a document in front of him. It was wired. Thompson continued into a shell company called Blue Water Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands. The sole signatory on that account is not Darnell Bishop. It is Tiffany Bishop. Darnell looked down at the paper. His hands were shaking as he picked it up. He read the numbers. $300,000, the exact amount of his life savings. The money he told me he had lost. The money he told me was just bad luck. Tiffany Darnell whispered, his voice barely audible. What is this Blue Water Holdings? Tiffany did not look at him. She stared straight ahead, her jaw set in a hard line. Thompson was not done. He picked up the photographs. And as for the motivation, Thompson said, handing the photos to the judge. We found that Mrs. Bishop has purchased a one-way ticket to Cabo San Lucas for next Monday. She is not traveling alone. She is traveling with a Mr. Bradley Miller, her personal trainer, with whom she has been co-signing checks from the Blue Water account for the past 6 months. The judge looked at the photos. I had seen them already. They were the ones of Tiffany and her lover at the bar, kissing, laughing, spending my son's money. The judge's expression turned from professional detachment to open revulsion. Darnell stood up. He snatched the photos from the judge's bench before the bailiff could stop him. He stared at them. He stared at the image of his wife, the woman he had terrorized his own father to please, draped over another man. The woman who told him he was smart, who told him he was a businessman, who told him that putting me in a home was an act of love. It was not a scream that came out of Darnell's throat. It was a sound of pure agonizing breakage. It was the sound of a man realizing that he had burned down his own house to keep a vampire warm. You, Darnell choked out, turning to face her. You told me we were partners. You told me the market crashed. Tiffany finally looked at him. And in that moment, she decided to stop pretending. She dropped the act of the victim. She dropped the act of the wife. She looked at him with the cold, dead eyes of a shark that has finished feeding. The market did crash, Darnell. She said, her voice dripping with contempt. You are the market. You have been crashing for years. You are weak. You are lazy. And you are broke. Did you really think I was going to stick around and nurse your ego while you played with your daddy's money? Darnell stepped back as if she had physically struck him. But we did this together. I hit my father for you. I forged his name for you. And that makes you a criminal, not a husband, Tiffany sneered. I didn't make you do anything. I just watched you be the pathetic little boy you have always been. Brad is a man. Brad knows how to take what he wants. You just know how to beg. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the stenographer had stopped typing, her mouth agape. Darnell looked at me. He looked across the aisle at the father he had betrayed. He saw me standing there, strong, vindicated, and untouched by the filth he had rolled in. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the sweat of his panic. "Dad," he whispered. "Dad, I didn't know." I looked at him. I felt a pang of sorrow, deep and ancient, but I did not step forward to comfort him. He needed to feel this burn. He needed to know what the fire felt like when you played with it. "You didn't know because you didn't look, son," I said softly. "You were too busy looking at what you could take from me to see who was taking from you." Judge Vance slammed her gavel down so hard the wood handle cracked. "Enough," she shouted. "Mrs. Bishop, you are to surrender your passport immediately. The district attorney is already in the building regarding the forgery charges against your husband, and I am recommending they add grand larceny and fraud to your file as well. You are a flight risk and you are a disgrace." Tiffany's face went pale. The arrogance vanished as two bailiffs moved up behind her. And as for the child, the judge continued looking at the empty seat where a parent should have been concerned about their daughter. "It is the opinion of this court that neither of you is fit to care for a houseplant, let alone a teenage girl." Mr. Thompson stepped forward. "Your Honor, Mr. Clarence Bishop has filed an emergency petition for full legal and physical custody of his granddaughter, Jasmine Bishop. He has the means, the stability, and frankly, he is the only adult in this family who has shown any moral compass." Darnell looked up. He looked at me. For a second, I thought he would fight it. I thought his ego would rear its ugly head one last time, but he just slumped his shoulders. He looked at Tiffany, who was now arguing with the bailiffs, and then he looked at his empty hands. "Let him have her," Darnell whispered, his voice broken. "She is better off with him. She hates me anyway." Judge Vance nodded. "Petition granted. Jasmine Bishop is placed in the custody of her grandfather, effective immediately. Mrs. Bishop, you are remanded into custody pending a bail hearing." "Mr. Bishop," she looked at Darnell with a mixture of pity and severity, "I suggest you find a very good criminal defense attorney, because your wife is going to blame everything on you, and from what I have seen today, you gave her all the ammunition she needs." The bailiffs took Tiffany by the arms. She started screaming then. She screamed that it was a mistake, that she was the victim, that I was the devil. I watched her get dragged out of the double doors, her heels scraping against the marble, her pearls bouncing against her neck. Darnell did not move. He sat alone at the table, surrounded by the wreckage of his life. He had no wife. He had no money. He had no daughter. And he had no father. I walked over to him. I stood there for a moment, looking down at the top of his head. I wanted to touch his shoulder. I wanted to tell him it would be okay. But that would be a lie. It wasn't going to be okay for a long time. I laid the Bible I had carried with me on the table in front of him. "Read the story of the prodigal son, Darnell," I said quietly. "But remember, the son had to walk all the way home from the pigsty on his own 2 feet. I cannot carry you this time." I turned and walked away. I walked out of the courtroom and into the hallway. Jasmine was sitting on a bench waiting. She was wearing her school backpack, her knees pulled up to her chest. When she saw me, she jumped up. She didn't ask what happened. She just looked at my face. "Is it over?" she asked. I took her hand. It was trembling just like mine had been the night I hid the pills. "The fire is out, baby girl," I said. "Let's go home." We walked out of the courthouse together, leaving Darnell behind to face the cold, hard reality of the ashes he had created. I had won the war, but as any soldier will tell you, victory never feels like happiness. It just feels like survival. And today we had survived. The silence that descended on the courtroom after the doors closed behind Tiffany was heavy enough to crush a man, and that is exactly what it did to my son. Darnell stood alone at the defense table. The space beside him where his wife had stood was empty, a physical void that mirrored the emptiness of his excuses. He looked around the room, his eyes darting from the judge to the bailiff and finally resting on me. He did not look like a 42-year-old businessman anymore. He looked like a child who had broken a window and was waiting for the strap. His shoulders slumped and his knees buckled. Slowly, painfully, he sank down until he was kneeling on the marble floor. He did not care about his suit. He did not care about the people watching. He folded his hands together and looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. "Dad," he choked out, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Dad, please. You saw what she is. You saw the photos. She tricked me. She manipulated me. I was under her spell, Dad. I did not want to do any of it." I stood there leaning on my cane watching him. A part of me, the part that remembered teaching him to ride a bike, wanted to reach out, but I remembered the other Darnell, the one who looked at me with contempt in my own kitchen, the one who forged my name without a second thought. "You are a grown man, Darnell," I said, my voice low and rough. "You are not a victim. You are a volunteer. She could not have driven the car if you had not handed her the keys." "But I am sorry," Darnell sobbed, crawling a few inches closer on his knees. "I am so sorry. I will make it right. I will pay back the money. I will take care of you. Just please tell the judge to drop the charges. Tell them it was a family misunderstanding. Do not let them take me to jail, Dad. I cannot survive in there." Judge Vance looked at me. She was waiting. It was within my power to show mercy. I could tell Mr. Thompson to withdraw the complaint. I could let Darnell walk away with probation and a ruined reputation. It would be the easy thing to do. It would be the fatherly thing to do. But I was not just a father anymore. I was a man who had been assaulted. I was a victim of elder abuse. And if I let him go now, he would never learn. He would spend the rest of his life blaming Tiffany, blaming the market, blaming bad luck. He would never look in the mirror and see the monster he had allowed himself to become. I looked at Mr. Thompson and nodded. "Play the video," I said. Darnell froze. "What video?" Thompson tapped the screen of his tablet, which was connected to the large monitors on the courtroom walls. "This video was recorded 4 days ago," Thompson announced, "by Jasmine Bishop. It documents the inciting incident that led to the emergency conservatorship filing." The screen flickered to life. The audio was crisp and clear. It showed my kitchen. It showed Darnell pacing. It showed Tiffany sitting at the table. And it showed me standing by the counter. The Darnell on the screen was not the weeping man kneeling on the floor. He was arrogant. He was aggressive. "Sign the papers, Dad," the Darnell on the screen shouted. "No," I said on the screen. And then it happened. The slap. The sound of his hand striking my face was like a gunshot in the silent courtroom. I saw the judge flinch. I saw the court reporter cover her mouth, but the video did not stop there. It continued. It showed Darnell standing over me while I wiped blood from my lip. It showed him screaming that he would put me in a home. It showed him plotting with Tiffany to drug me. Then the video cut to a second clip. This one was darker, shot through the banister rails. It was the night of the forgery. "It looks like an old man signed it," Darnell's voice said on the recording. "I will file this tonight. We will be free of him." The screen went black. Darnell was not crying anymore. He was staring at the floor, his face the color of ash. He knew there was no coming back from that. He could blame Tiffany for the fraud, but he could not blame her for the slap. That was his hand. That was his rage. I looked down at him. "She did not make you hit me, Darnell," I said. "She did not make you hate me. You did that all on your own. You decided that my dignity was less important than your lifestyle. You decided that I was disposable." "Dad," Darnell whispered, but the word had lost its power. Judge Vance leaned forward. Her face was hard as stone. "Mr. Bishop," she said, addressing Darnell, "the court has seen enough. You claim you were a victim of your wife's manipulation, but the evidence shows a willing and violent partner. You assaulted a vulnerable senior citizen. You forged legal documents. You conspired to deprive a man of his liberty and his property." She turned to the bailiff. "Take him into custody." 2 officers moved in. They did not be gentle. They pulled Darnell up from his knees. He did not fight. He went limp like a rag doll. I watched them pull his arms behind his back. I heard the metallic click of the handcuffs. It was a sound of finality. It was the sound of a door closing that would not open again for a very long time. "Dad," Darnell screamed as they began to march him toward the side door. "Dad, help me. Do not let them take me. I am your son." I stood still. I watched him struggle. I watched the panic in his eyes. "You are my son," I said quietly, though he could not hear me over his own screaming. "And that is why I have to let this happen. A father protects his child from the fire, but he does not protect him from the truth." I did not look away until the door closed behind him. The silence returned to the courtroom, but this time it was not heavy. It was empty. The cancer had been cut out. The wound would bleed for a long time, but at least now the healing could begin. Judge Vance looked at me with soft eyes. "I am sorry you had to do that, Mr. Bishop," she said. I nodded slowly, gripping the handle of my cane. "Actions have consequences." "Your Honor," I said. "He wanted to be a man of means. Now he is just a man of consequences. The lesson was expensive, but he bought it with his own choices." I turned around. Mr. Thompson gathered his files. We walked down the aisle toward the exit. I did not look back at the empty defense table. I did not look back at the place where my family had died. I looked forward toward the doors where the sun was shining and where my granddaughter was waiting. The destruction was total. My house was empty. My bank account was bruised. My heart was broken. But my integrity was intact. And as I pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out into the city air, I took the first deep breath I had taken in months. It tasted like freedom. The silence of the house was different now. Before, it was a silence filled with tension, a silence that hid secrets and unspoken threats. Now it was just empty. I walked through the front door with Jasmine by my side. The police tape had been removed, but I could still see the faint outline of where the chaos had unfolded. I stood in the foyer, leaning on my cane, looking at the staircase where my son had confessed his crimes to a cell phone camera. I looked at the kitchen where he had raised his hand against me. Jasmine squeezed my hand. Her grip was strong, reassuring. She was not a child anymore. The last week had forged her into a woman just like the fire forges steel. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" she asked softly. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the old wood and the lemon polish Viola used to love. "I am okay," I said, "but this is not my home anymore." It is a strange thing to realize that 4 walls and a roof do not make a sanctuary. Memories do. And my memories here had been poisoned. Every corner held a shadow of betrayal. The dining room table where we used to have Christmas dinner was now the place where Darnell flipped the plates in rage. The living room was where Tiffany had plotted my demise. I could not sit in my armchair without remembering the fake doctor and the blue pills. We spent the next week packing. We did not pack everything. I left the furniture. I left the expensive rugs Tiffany had bought. I left the curtains. I only took what mattered. I took Viola's china. I took my record collection. I took the photo albums, carefully removing the pictures of Darnell and placing them in a separate box, not to be thrown away, but to be stored in the attic of my mind, a tragic history I had to accept. I put the house on the market on a Tuesday. By Friday it was sold. A young couple with a baby on the way bought it. I watched them walk through the garden talking about where they would put the swing set. They saw a future here. I only saw the past. I signed the papers without a trembling hand. I handed over the keys, the same keys Darnell had demanded, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I had been carrying for 40 years. We did not move into a condo in the city. I was done with noise. I was done with the hustle. I used the money from the house sale and the proceeds from the Wisconsin land, the very land Darnell had tried to steal, to buy a place I had dreamed of since I was a rookie firefighter. It was a small villa on the edge of Lake Geneva. It was not a mansion. It did not have marble floors or crystal chandeliers. It had wide windows that looked out over the water. It had a porch that wrapped around the entire house. It had a dock where I could sit in the morning with my coffee and watch the mist rise off the lake. But the restoration was not just about bricks and mortar. It was about the soul. A week after we moved in, I drove back to the city to meet with Mr. Thompson. I sat in his office, the same office where we had strategized our defense. "Mr. Thompson," I said, placing a cashier's check on his mahogany desk, "this is the money from the Wisconsin land sale. Darnell wanted this money to buy a vacation home in Cabo. He wanted it to fund a life of vanity." Thompson looked at the check. It was a substantial sum. "What do you want to do with it, Clay? Invest it?" "No," I said, looking out the window at the skyline I had spent my life protecting. "I want to build something that lasts longer than a house." I established the Viola Bishop Scholarship Fund. It was designed for children from the South Side, kids who grew up in the same neighborhood I did, kids who had the grades but not the money, kids who wanted to be engineers, doctors, or architects. I made the criteria specific. It was not just about academic excellence. It was about character. The applicants had to write an essay about a time they stood up for something right even when it cost them. When I signed the founding documents, I felt Viola's hand on my shoulder. She always wanted to be a teacher, but she had to work in a factory to help me pay the mortgage. Now her name would carry hundreds of children into a future she never got to have. It was the ultimate justice. The money that greed tried to steal was now fueling hope. Jasmine thrived in the lake house. The quiet did not scare her. It healed her. She set up her study area in the sunroom overlooking the water. She was applying to pre-law programs. She told me she wanted to be a prosecutor. She wanted to protect people who could not protect themselves. One evening I sat on the porch listening to the crickets and the gentle lapping of the water against the dock. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Jasmine came out with 2 mugs of tea. She sat next to me on the swing. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the day turn into night. "You know, Grandpa," she said, looking at the horizon, "I used to be angry. I used to hate them for what they did." I took a sip of tea. The warmth spread through my chest. "And now?" I asked. "Now," she said, resting her head on my shoulder, "I just feel sorry for them. They had everything. They had us. And they traded it for nothing." I put my arm around her. "That is the tragedy of greed, baby girl," I said. "It makes you starve while you are sitting at a banquet. But look at us. We have the lake, we have the tea, and we have the truth." I looked at the water. I thought about Darnell sitting in his cell. I hoped that one day he would find peace. But I knew that my peace was right here. I had reclaimed my life. I had pruned the dead branches from my family tree so that the healthy ones could grow. The restoration was complete. I was not just Clarence Bishop the victim. I was Clarence Bishop the patriarch. And for the first time in a long time, the foundation under my feet felt solid. It took me a year to get into my car and drive to Stateville Correctional Center. For 12 months, I sat on my porch looking at the lake, letting the water wash away the memory of the courtroom and the sound of the handcuffs clicking shut. I needed that time. I needed to mourn the son I thought I had before I could face the stranger sitting in a cell. The drive was long and gray. The prison rose out of the cornfields like a concrete scar on the landscape. It was a place of iron and razor wire, a place designed to strip a man of his soul. I walked through the security checkpoints, leaning on my cane, enduring the pat-downs and the metal detectors. The guards looked at me with a mix of pity and respect. They saw an old man in a nice suit. They did not know the war I had fought to get here. I sat in the visitation room. It smelled of industrial cleaner and stale fear. The air was thick with the murmurs of broken families trying to bridge the gap across stainless steel tables. I folded my hands and waited. When the door on the far side opened, my heart gave a painful thud. I had prepared myself, but nothing prepares a father for seeing his child in state-issued yellow. Darnell shuffled in. He was unrecognizable. The man who had worn Italian silk suits and bragged about cryptocurrency was gone. In his place was a shadow. He had lost 30 pounds. His skin was sallow, his hair thinning and unkempt, but it was his eyes that hurt the most. They were not humble. They were hollow, burning with a low, resentful fire. He sat down heavily on the metal stool. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was. He just looked at my suit, then at my watch, then at my face. "You look good, Dad," Darnell said, his voice raspy and thin. "You look like you haven't lost a minute of sleep while I have been rotting in here." I looked at him calmly. "I have slept, Darnell, but I have not forgotten." Darnell let out a bitter, cracking laugh. He leaned forward, his chains rattling against the table. "Forgotten? How could you forget? You put me here. You and that high-priced lawyer of yours. You could have stopped it. You could have told the judge it was a mistake. But you wanted to teach me a lesson, didn't you? Well, congratulations. I am learning. I am learning that family does not mean a thing when money is involved." I stayed silent. I let him pour out the poison. "And Tiffany," he continued, his voice rising in pitch, "do you know she got a plea deal? She turned state's evidence against me. She claimed I forced her to do it. She is out in 3 years. I got 10, Dad. 10 years because I am the one who signed the paper, because I am the one you testified against." He slammed his hand on the table. A guard took a step forward, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Is that what you tell yourself at night, Darnell?" I asked softly. "That you are the victim?" "I am the victim," he hissed. "I lost my wife. I lost my daughter. I lost my freedom. And you are out there living in a lake house spending the money I tried to secure for us. Do you even care? Do you even have a picture of me in that house? I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I saw him clearly. I did not see my son. I saw a man who was addicted to his own innocence. He was 43 years old, and he was still waiting for me to fix it. He was still waiting for me to pull out my checkbook and make the bad things go away. And that was my fault. I realized then that the crime wasn't just his. It was mine too. I had spent his whole life shielding him from the rain so he never learned how to build a shelter. I had bailed him out of debt. I had bought him cars. I had silenced his critics. I had loved him so much that I had crippled him. I leaned forward. The plexiglass barrier was cold against my fingertips. Darnell, I said, my voice steady and low. I spent 40 years trying to give you the life I never had. I worked double shifts in the smoke and the fire so you could have soft hands. I sent you to schools where they taught you calculus and history. I taught you how to tie a tie. I taught you how to speak to bankers. I taught you how to walk into a room like you owned it. Darnell stared at me, his mouth slightly open, caught off guard by the shift in my tone. But I failed you, I continued. Because in all those lessons, I forgot the most important one. I forgot to teach you how to be a man. Darnell scoffed, rolling his eyes. Oh, here comes the sermon. It is not a sermon, son. It is a fact. A man takes responsibility for his actions. A man protects his family. He does not sell them. A man accepts the consequences of his mistakes. I did not teach you that. I robbed you of that struggle. And because I didn't let you struggle, you never grew strong. I paused, looking around the bleak room. So now I said, society has to do my job for me. The world is teaching you what I could not. It is teaching you that actions have weight. It is teaching you that no amount of money can buy back your character. Darnell's face crumbled. The anger momentarily gave way to fear. Dad, get me out, he whispered, reverting to the little boy lost in a department store. Please, I cannot do 10 years. I will die in here. Call Mr. Thompson. Get an appeal. I will do anything. I shook my head slowly. You are exactly where you need to be, Darnell. You are in the only place that can save you now, because in here you cannot hide behind me. You cannot hide behind a checkbook. You have to face yourself. I reached into the pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a small worn book. It was not a checkbook. It was not a legal file. It was a pocket-sized New Testament, the leather cover cracked and faded. It was the one I carried in my turnout coat for 30 years. It smelled of smoke and survival. I slid it through the slot in the partition. Darnell looked at it with disdain. A Bible. That is your help. It is the only map I have left to give you, I said. Read it. Don't read it for forgiveness. Read it to understand that even the prodigal son had to walk through the mud before he could come home. You are still in the mud, Darnell, and you have to walk out of it on your own. I stood up. My knees popped a reminder of my own mortality. I looked at him one last time. I memorized his face, not the face of the inmate, but the face of the possibility that still lived somewhere deep inside him. Goodbye, Darnell, I said. Dad. Wait, he shouted, standing up, his chains clanking loudly. You cannot just leave me. When are you coming back? When will I see you? I did not answer. I turned my back on him. Dad. Look at me. Dad. His voice cracked, turning into a sob that echoed off the concrete walls. It was a terrible sound, a sound that would haunt my dreams for years. But I did not turn around. I gripped my cane. I focused on the exit sign, a glowing red beacon at the end of the hall. To turn back now would be to undo everything. To turn back would be to say that his tears were more important than his soul. I walked toward the door, step by step. The heavy steel door buzzed and clicked unlock. I pushed it open. I walked out of the visitation room, leaving my son behind in the box he had built for himself. I walked through the corridors, past the guards, and out into the blinding white sunlight of the prison yard. I took a deep breath. The air tasted of dust and gasoline, but it also tasted of the future. I had done my duty. I had closed the book. Now it was up to Darnell to decide if he would write a new chapter or if he would just be a footnote in the story of our family. I walked to my car, got in, and started the engine. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I put the car in drive and headed toward the lake where the water was calm and the slate was clean. The sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, painting the surface of Lake Geneva in shades of burnt orange and deep violet. I sat on the end of the wooden dock, my legs dangling over the edge, my old fishing rod resting comfortably in my hands. Beside me, Jasmine was baiting her hook. She did not wince at the worm anymore. She handled it with the same precision she used to handle her textbooks. It had been 6 months since I walked out of that prison. 6 months of silence. 6 months of healing. The lake was quiet. There were no shouting voices here. There were no slamming doors. There were no lawyers in expensive suits trying to dissect my life. There was only the sound of the water lapping against the pilings and the rhythmic chirping of the crickets tuning up for their evening concert. Jasmine's phone buzzed on the dock between us. Usually I would tell her to ignore it. I would tell her that fishing requires focus, that the fish can hear a ringtone from a mile away. But today was different. Today was the day the notifications went out. She froze. Her hand hovered over the screen. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror. "Go ahead, baby girl," I said, nodding toward the glowing screen. "Open it." She picked it up. Her thumb hovered over the email icon. She took a breath that seemed to last a lifetime. Then she tapped the screen. I watched her face. I watched her eyes scan the text. For a second, she did not move. She did not breathe. Then she dropped the phone. It clattered onto the wooden planks. She turned to me, and tears were already spilling over her cheeks. But these were not the tears of fear I had seen in the courtroom. These were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I got in. It is Harvard Law, full scholarship." I reeled in my lines slowly. I set the rod down. I looked at my granddaughter, the girl who had hidden in the shadows of a broken home, the girl who had been brave enough to spy on her own parents to save her grandfather. "Harvard," I said, letting the word roll around in my mouth. I looked out at the water. I thought about Viola. I thought about how she used to scrub floors in houses she wasn't allowed to live in. I thought about the red lines on the maps that tried to keep us in the ghetto. I thought about Darnell sitting in a cell blaming the world for his failures. And then I looked at Jasmine. She was the victory. She was the restoration. I stood up. My knees didn't hurt today. I pulled her into a hug, and she buried her face in my shoulder, sobbing happy tears into my flannel shirt. "You did it, Jasmine," I said, holding her tight. "You did it." "No, Grandpa," she mumbled into my chest. "We did it." I pulled back and looked at her. The wind blew across the lake, cooling the heat of the day. I felt something change in my face. The muscles around my mouth, which had been set in a hard, grim line for so long, began to soften. The weight in my chest, the heavy stone of betrayal and anger, finally dissolved. I smiled. It wasn't a polite smile for a neighbor. It wasn't a sarcastic smile for a lawyer. It was a real, genuine smile. It started in my heart and worked its way up to my eyes. It felt strange and wonderful all at the same time. We sat back down as the stars began to appear one by one. We didn't talk much after that. We just watched the bobbers dance on the dark water. I realized then that peace is not just the absence of war. Peace is the presence of the right people. I had lost a son, but I had saved a family. I had lost a house, but I had found a home. The line on my reel went taut. A fish was biting. I grabbed the rod. Jasmine grabbed the net. We were a team. "Pull it in." "Grandpa," she laughed. "Pull it in." I cranked the handle, feeling the fight on the other end. I was 74 years old. My hands were scarred. My heart was patched. But as I pulled that fish from the water under the light of the rising moon, I knew one thing for sure. The fire was out, and the water was fine. We often believe that family is a sanctuary, a bond that cannot be broken. But blood is biological. Loyalty is a choice. As a father, I learned the hardest lesson of all: enabling a child's greed is not love, it is destruction. By shielding Darnell from the consequences of his actions, I crippled his character. My justice wasn't about revenge, it was about finally letting him face the world he tried to manipulate. True dignity lies not in how much you can endure in silence, but in knowing when to stand up and say, "Enough." Protect your peace, even if it means pruning your own family tree. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to make a hard choice to protect your own peace, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments below which city you are listening from. And if you believe that justice is worth fighting for, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories to tell, and I will be right here waiting to share them with you. See you in the next one.